I have a book coming out in April 2018. It's called Real Magic. And the idea of it is that if you take the notion of non-local consciousness as a real construct, you simply say, we think that is real, and we have lots of scientific reasons for that, and there's philosophical reasons, it's a leading edge of science. What do we do with that idea? Well, the first thing that you notice is you go back to the history of the esoteric traditions, all the way back to shamanism, and that is the perennial philosophy. It is codified in basically two forms. One is consciousness is fundamental, and consciousness comes before space and time. That's like the most pithy way you can shove together 50,000 years of esoteric lore. If that is true, if that lore is true, it means that our esoteric ideas about magic are also true. And so you could say, well, let's do a synthesis of all of this scrambled lore about magic. What does it mean? It comes down to three things. You have divination, the ability to see at a distance through space and time. You have force of will. Your intention can push the world around. And you have something that the tradition is called theurgy, which is the two Greek words together, which means God work. But what it means is that there's something like intelligent spirits out there that you can interact with. And if you're really lucky, they'll do things on your behalf, and if you're not so lucky, they'll possess you or do bad things. So that's what it is, divination, force of will, and theurgy. That's what magic is about. From a magician perspective, I'm talking about people who are deeply into metaphysics and they use magical principles and so on. When you look through the literature on that, of which it is huge, huge literature, a theme pops out which says that this stuff is completely real, but science is incapable of actually learning anything about it. So that's from that side. On the other side, you have religious perspective in which magic is completely real. It must be real, like Catholicism. The Eucharist is a magical practice, but only certain people are allowed to do it, and anyone else who does it any other way is heretical and demonic. So it's real, but it's demonic, so don't pay attention to it. And then you have a third one, which is scientists, at least standard science, which looks at magic and say, no, that was superstition, we got rid of it. None of that works. And I would say, actually, all three branches are wrong. First of all, science can study divination, can study force of will, can study if there are things like spirits, and has been doing so for over a century. We find in every single case that there's evidence that's there. There are forms of divination. You can think of precognition as divination or clairvoyance. We know that that's real. For force of will, it has to do with intentional effects. We call it psychokinetic effects. We know that that's real. In terms of theurgy, we can do studies like mediumship and look at near-death experiences and so on. And we see that there's pretty good evidence there also that embodiment is not just this form. There may be an infinite number of ways that something can be embodied without even a physical body, perhaps. So that means that the core ideas of traditional esoteric magic are probably true. And so the rest of the book, I'd cover the history of this and talk about why we have good evidence that it's real from a scientific perspective, why from a religious perspective, scientific perspective, and practicing magicians, they all have kind of missed the boat because they don't see the science. So I'm like raising it up saying, well, look, this stuff actually exists. And then most of the rest of the book is on the implications of it. So the implications has to do with our philosophy of thinking about consciousness and what is it and how does it work. And then I also spend some time talking about why we know this is actually the leading edge of science now. This is the future of science. In exactly the same way that alchemy became chemistry, and in some ways astrology became astronomy, and herbalism became the pharmaceutical world, they all left out, science left out a fourth element that exists in all of them, but we don't talk about it anymore. It's consciousness. So in the original alchemists, they knew that the consciousness and intention of the practitioner was an extremely important point that had to be put into the practice. The same goes for herbalism, the same goes for astrology. The intention and consciousness were a part of it. So that all got stripped out when these turned into science. Basically what I see then is that the fourth element will be brought back into science. We'll have new words and new means of thinking about it and so on, but that will be the future of science. And when we get to that stage, first of all, we hope we don't blow each other up because just like any new knowledge creates new power, we're talking about a power here which is way beyond anything that we've experienced before. So it's dangerous. And the danger may be one of the reasons that we know unconsciously that this is way too dangerous for us in our present state. So maybe we need to evolve into Homo superior or some other form where we're able to be mature enough to handle that level of power. So these are the kinds of thoughts that they basically bring into, well, magic is real, well, why are we not using it in that way? Well, there are good reasons for not using it that way.